Hey everyone, James from TDB here, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about traditionally stored raw pu'erh, as well as featuring a couple teas from Yee On tea that would fit into that category. So a 2008 raw pu'erh that's been traditionally stored, and a 2001. So this is a category of tea, back when I did my sort of subcategories of raw pu'erh that I think everyone should try, that I put on there. And the reason is that the tea ages in a really interesting and distinct way, and it's a sort of tea that's really not available on the Western market. So I got very excited when Yee On started to offer those teas, and as you've probably seen, I've featured a few different Yee On teas on the ripe. Traditionally stored ripe is also definitely well worth trying, and it's something I've talked about. And frankly speaking, sort of sampling through Yee On's teas, trying a bunch of different ones, I found that the ripe, I had really high hit ratio, and there's a lot of teas that I really liked, including some for inexpensive prices. For raws, on the other hand, it did take a little more sampling for me to really find a couple teas that I'd feel good, that really hit the spot for me. Not to say that they're bad. I know some people are fans of the Taste of Hong Kong, which is a tea that I have brought on to TDB in the past. For me, that tea is very hit or miss. It has a certain bitterness to it that I don't particularly care for, in combination with that sort of like Hong Kong funkiness that you get from the traditionally stored tea. But now I have run into a couple teas that I feel better about recommending, and I think are pretty good. So the first one is an inexpensive option. It's a 2008 brick, Zhong Chen brick. It sells for, I think, 220 Hong Kong dollars, which is about $20 US dollars per brick. So it's about 11 to 12 cents a gram. So it's a really inexpensive tea. It's from 2008. And one of the things that this traditionally stored tea does is that it does age the tea pretty fast. Some of you might be saying, 2008, that's pretty young. But, you know, this traditionally stored pu'erh makes the tea very ready to drink in not so long. Jiangchen is not an area that I am completely a fan of. There's not too many teas that I've liked from them, but I think given the storage and stuff like that, this is definitely a tea worth trying, and I think it's good. I think it's a solid tea as long as you set your expectations appropriately. And my expectations were very appropriate, as it was just 11 cents a gram. And I think it should blow by just about any of those expectations, just considering what the price of more modern pu'erh does cost these days. 11 cents a gram, you could do a lot worse. For me, the traditionally stored raw, because it does sort of like accelerate that aging, is perfect in my own tea diet as sort of very casual brew. I drink these teas very similar to how I drink my ripe in the morning. So I'll use this big blue pot, and I will serve some for myself and my wife, and then I'll maybe slowly drink it throughout the day. And that is exactly how I have been drinking this 2008 Jiangchen brick, which I will bring on. And the other tea I'm going to be talking about is a 2001 Chagwon tool that is 480 Hong Kong dollars. So it's a bit more expensive. It's closer to 60 cents a gram or so. And I think that tea is good. And I've actually had some very good success introducing different people to that tea, and a lot of people have been quite a fan, especially when considering that something like traditionally stored tea is a pretty unfamiliar taste for most different people, even people that are usual tea drinkers. I think it's definitely a specialty, which is one of the reasons I do recommend people seek it out. Okay, so enough talking, and let us get into this tea. Alright, so similar to my ripes, it's something I've been drinking throughout the day, so this is something like steep number 5 or so. Yeah, just brewing in this big blue pot, about 9.5 grams for 185 milliliters. Just brewing real casually. In comparison to ripe teas tend to have this really ginseng herbal flavor. The aromas and the tastes that come from these are actually somewhat different. It's definitely still in that sort of like earthy category, usually a little less creamy than a ripe tea. Definitely some earth notes to this. This is certainly a smell and taste that's going to be a little bit more acquired for, I think, a lot of people. I'm someone that initially really liked this tea. I like that sort of like deep, very natural tasting earthiness to it. So yeah, let's get to it. Brews, as you can see, a little bit lighter than ripe, but I mean, for a 13-year-old raw pu'erh tea, that's a pretty dark color. So cheers. Soft, woody, just a natural sweetness to it. Less, basically very little of that bitter funkiness that you get from the taste of Hong Kong. Maybe just a little bit of fruit to this as well. Cheers. Yeah, very easy to drink. I find this is a pretty consistent brew in and brew out. Just boiled this water right before hitting record, so I will do another steep right here. And, you know, because of the inaccessibility of this tea, these sorts of teas, it's something that I've always really sought out when I travel. One nice thing about traditionally stored tea is they're not necessarily very expensive, and there's a financial reason why people have started to really gear towards dry storage, and vendors have really shifted away from this sort of storage. Yeah, it just gets more money. Something like this is definitely irreversible as far as that goes, but there's something to be said for the smoothness and how comfortable and easy these teas are to drink. Very, very easy on the stomach. I think they're great casually. And, you know, a lot of people do like this, even if it's something that's probably pretty unfamiliar, especially to more of a Western palate. Yeah, sort of has a little bit more brightness than you'd expect from a ripe tea. Less of that ginseng. Yep, and I think this will continue to go for a couple more steeps as well. So yeah, pretty simple and basic tea, but I think it's quite solid, especially for the price. So definitely one I'd recommend. So if that sounds interesting to you, and you haven't tried a lot of traditionally stored raw tea, and you're going to place an order to Yee On to try some different stuff, I definitely recommend this tea as one of the ones to check out as far as the traditionally stored raw. So starting out with something like this, and maybe like the best taste or the purple ripe Munghai that they sell, I think that's a fantastic way to inexpensively try a couple different categories of tea that are frankly hard to find. One other thing I'm going to add about traditional stored pu'erh is that this is a very specific sort of storage. It doesn't mean it's not quite the same as naturally storing a tea in Taiwan or Hong Kong or Malaysia or something like that. The result is going to be different. So even if you've tried a somewhat humid stored tea from a vendor like Essence of Tea or Yunnan Sourcing, that's not a given that the storage is going to be similar to this. So one reason I'm really happy that Yee On has started selling these teas is they give us a much greater access to this style of storage, which I am personally quite a fan of, and I think a lot of people should really check out. So I'm going to give this tea a 6.1 rating, and let's move on to that Chagwon tool. Filming the 2001 Chagwon. So I had this tea this morning. I am actually brewing out of the clusters version. They sell a tool as well, but I have the 2001 Chagwon clusters. I don't know that it makes a huge difference. Same tea. I mean, I think the way a lot of people drink these teas is they break them up, and then we'll have it fairly casually. That way you don't have to break it up each time. If you're not attached, I think it's a good way to effectively drink tea and not collect it as well. Not a big deal. So yeah, I had this tea very similar to how I have most of my ripe tea in the morning, just with my wife. definitely a little bit of a higher end tea than we normally do. And I mean, I think it's also interesting as sort of a contrast versus Chagwon, the brand. This is Chagwon in name, but this is a totally different beast compared to Chagwon that I think most people are going to be familiar with. And that's just a product of storage, and it just shows you how sort of affecting the traditional storage is for a tea like this. Okay, so brew and steep number 5 here. Let's go. Very smooth. It has less of the sort of forced floor taste. Definitely a fair bit of creaminess, a little bit of vanilla going on too. Very tasty, very smooth, nice body as well. This is also sort of an interesting contrast versus a 1994 Xiaguan ripe that Yee On also sells that I think is a little more in that really herbal ginseng range. For me, I prefer the raw 2001 tool, but that tea is interesting because I think it's developed some flavors that I think most people are not used to having, even in sort of traditionally stored ripe. Tea like this going to be very flexible in how you brew it as well. Getting maybe hints of some fruit in this as well. Definitely not sort of like stone fruit category, more in like, I don't know, maybe like lychee or something like that. Definitely a sort of a background taste. I'd say predominantly a very earthy, woody taste to it. And this tea also is notably very clean, in my opinion. And this traditional storage, what they'll do is they'll store it, the intense part very early on, and then after that it'll be stored in a much more dry condition, and that sort of is, I think, one of the keys to creating this product that tastes good and is also fairly clean. Of course, if it is a little too dirty for you, you can just rinse it a couple times. I'm not saying that specifically for this tea, but for traditionally stored tea in general. Rinsing it 2-3 times or even 4, I've heard of, if you're someone that's averse to some of those storage notes. Totally fine. I think it's better to try the tea sort of on your own terms in a way that you're most likely to enjoy it than it is to totally write off the category of tea. But yeah, this is one that 60 cents a gram, so definitely sort of would make a good pairing with the Zhong Chen, as just sort of getting a full range of traditionally stored raw pu'erh. So yeah, recommend this tea. Very constant, this one. Still sort of in that woody, creamy vanilla category. Yeah, I like this. So very, very smooth, very easy to drink. Something like this really passed the speed test for me. If this were a less expensive tea, I could see myself drinking this just about every day in the morning with my wife in just a very casual setting. So yeah, going to give this a 7.2 rating. I think it satisfies everything I would want from a tea of this range and sort of storage pedigree. So yeah, that wraps up this Inbetweenisode. Let me know your experience with Yee On or traditionally stored raws. I know this sort of tea can be very hit or miss, so totally fine if you don't care for it. But yeah, I think I'm very happy to have Yee On selling tea to the Western market, or globally, really now. So thank you to those folks over there for having some nice examples of traditionally stored tea to buy, and I will see y'all next time.